I'm Debbie Porter. I'm the founder of the Boston Book Festival. I want to welcome you today, and I'm glad to see you all here. Feel free to contribute. It's a little early in the morning to be super psyched about the festival, but maybe later you'll want to donate $10. I want to thank the Plymouth Rock Foundation for its generosity in sponsoring today's session on bugs in the system. This is one of the ones I've been looking forward to the most, not just because my friends Dan Ariely and Mark Moffett are presenting, but because I think it's going to be a super session. Now I'd like to introduce our host for the session, comedian, radio, and TV personality, and former Rhodes Scholar, Faith Sally. Thank you all.
Hello. Welcome to Bugs in the System. You are about to meet two fantastically entertaining and compelling scientists, Dan Ariely and Mark Moffett, whose respective work does indeed focus on bugs. Dan puts humans under a microscope to reveal the bugs in our motivations and choices, and Mark unearths literal bugs, specifically ants, to introduce us to a complex civilization over which we usually blindly tread. Beyond the buggy thematic wordplay that unites these two scientists today, there's another connection between Dan and Mark that they share as storytellers. They're both about to open your eyes dramatically to what's in us and around us and under us. Dan highlights how the irrational behavior of people, and you will find that that includes you and me, in fact, surprises us, but maybe it shouldn't, he suggests. And Mark introduces us to the behavior of ants, critters we pretty much overlook unless they're really driving us crazy, and suggests maybe they should surprise us with their amazing societies. So let me start by introducing you to Mark Moffett, aka Dr. Bugs, aka the Indiana Jones of entomology, the Jane Goodall of ants. He's been called all those things and more. He's a research associate at the Smithsonian, a Harvard PhD who studied with E.O. Wilson, a regular contributor to National Geographic, and a regular straight man on the Colbert Report. His new book is called Adventures Among Ants, and I will add that I've recently had the pleasure of venturing into the Belizean jungle with Mark on assignment for CBS Sunday Morning. He will be prominently featured on a piece on that show in the next, I hope, month or so. And I have witnessed him not only getting bitten by countless ants, but I've also seen him bite the heads off the ants. So I can, and chew them and swallow them. So I can vouch for his embrace of the subject. Without further ado, Mark Moffett.
Hey. Thanks for coming out here. I'm going to introduce ants. So I'm not going to go into the predictably or unpredictably irrational side of ants because we need to be introduced to them first. Maybe we can talk about any number of things afterwards. But see how this works. I'm going to talk about a number of things that are interesting about ants, and basically, to me, what fascinates me about ants, among a number of other things, is the fact that they are more like people than we expect. We keep being told that the comparisons to chimpanzees, but in fact, modern human societies are much more like large ant societies than they are like chimpanzee societies. Only ants and humans have to worry about things like market economy situations, traffic rules and highways, moving around infrastructure, and dealing with things like warfare. So I'm going to start off with a simple example that's kind of curious. There is, in fact, a range of ant societies. It's, for some reason, rather similar to the range of human societies in size. So there are groups of ants, there are species that have societies of up to maybe a dozen or so individuals, like a hunter-gatherer group might have in humans, and there are species that have several million individuals in a society, like a city-state of humans. And across that range, you see a lot of patterns in common. These don't necessarily have to do with the intelligence of ants. In fact, they certainly don't. But the way societies have to be organized to deal with problems, depending on how big they are. And one of the commonalities is speed. And if you've ever been to, say, Times Square in New York, you may notice all those people from visiting out of town that are just stunned by how fast everything is. In fact, things are even faster in Boston in terms of walking speed, I believe, than New York. And things accelerate as societies get bigger and bigger, in both ants and humans. The smallest ant societies include this species. This is the mud ant. It covers itself with mud, and they move at a glacial pace. And this particular species we discovered actually does appropriate behavior. It hunts snail. So this picture shows a snail making a dramatic left-hand turn as it attempts to escape a mud ant in slow-mo. And as societies get bigger and bigger in ants, things accelerate. So the ants that invade your picnic are usually moving pretty fast. If you go down to Central America and you see the army ants, they're moving at supersonic speeds, it seems. And what actually happens is that information is gained. As societies get bigger and bigger, there's less self-reliance. The mud ant works on its own to catch its snail. And more information is exchanged between individuals as they're flowing past each other. So in this situation in Africa, these ants are actually checking each other out constantly, and they will actually be able to detect as they pass other individuals what each other ant is doing that day, whether it's foraging for food or helping raise the babies or building the nest. And on the basis of gathering this information as they go through the swarm of other ants, they can pick what they're going to do for the day. So the ant colony self-adjusts in terms of the kinds of actions that need to be done at a mass scale. Humans similarly learn from each other. In a small village, we know who we're going to see at the coffee shop in the morning. We know basically what's going to happen. There's no big gain in type A behavior, but in a place like Boston, you can be running around and seeing all kinds of things, even a lecture on irrationality in ants. So there's a lot more to be gained for going faster. Another thing about small societies and ants is that the self-reliance I mentioned before actually shows up in the way the ants perform work. They actually are able to do, individuals in a small group, all the tasks in the society. We're not talking about the queen who's the reproductive, we're talking about the workers. And one of the things that happens is that the workers actually, in many cases, end up with a tool chest. And this is a species that actually has a bear trap built into its face to catch prey, and a separate set of jaws down there to do other kind of tasks. It's sort of a Swiss Army knife ant. And this kind of behavior is traditional.
Do you have a wine opener?
They're not into alcohol, ants, too much. Unlike many other species that enjoy it very much, ants take their pleasure in working for the group, and they are workaholics to some extent. We'll talk about that later, but the work that they do in small societies is diverse. They can handle just about everything. As societies get bigger, you get more and more specialists. We see that in human societies. A small town may need just a few jobs. A big city may need hundreds or thousands of types of jobs. It's the same in an ant colony. And you can actually tell the jobs. Well, you know, if you walk around Boston, you can tell, like a guy with a hard hat and so forth is probably a construction worker. Someone with a briefcase and a dark suit might be a lawyer and so forth. And ants, you can tell the jobs they do by their size and shape. They're actually born as adult ants to a certain size, and they maintain that size for life. And each size is built to do different kinds of work in some of these larger societies. So this is the species I studied for my thesis. It has the greatest range of sizes in any ant society. This is a minor worker up here in the head of a major or soldier ant. And a soldier weighs about 500 minors. And what do the soldiers do? Well, one thing they do, they have a number of tasks, but one thing they do is they carry around the young ones like a school bus. They're not actually the young ones, sorry, the small ones. So here's one carrying about 15 ants, and not to school it turns out, but out to the battlefield. I'll get back to that in a minute. Here's another case of a specialized ant, one that Faith has now seen. This is the most specialized of all. This is a army ant, and if you go down to Central America and you see army ants moving along in their blazing speed, you'll notice along the edges of their highways these soldiers with enormous jaws, and you can ask yourself, well, what could a soldier do with such long jaws? Just keep track of how long those jaws there. And this is my finger. And those things are biting down to the bone, and they actually have fishhook tips so that they can't extract their own jaws. It's a form of suicide. They're specialists in attacking entomologists and other tourists. Here are the other ants in the same society, with the soldier ants, and then you have successively smaller ants. And the great thing is that as societies get bigger, you get more teamwork and assembly lines. This is true in humans and ant societies again. So these societies of army ants are enormous, and here we have the smaller size than the soldier is the submajor, and this is the media back here. And it turns out they're chopping up prey. They're army ants, so they kill a lot of things. Here's a nice, yummy piece of cockroach they're carrying home. And the smaller ants cannot pick it up. It's too big for them. Eventually, one of the more rare submajors with the yellow head comes along, lifts up the weight, and one of the smaller ants has its role come right into play. It picks up the trailing end and keeps it from dragging, so that they work as a team to get the food back efficiently. Now, the smallest ants of all in the society, we didn't know what they did until very recently. They're very hard to see, because it turns out that their job is to lay down in potholes in the trail and serve as living road fill. There's one in this picture you may not have noticed. It's underneath the other ants, and they're simply running over it. It makes a nice, smooth highway. Now, in smaller societies, teamwork and working together in general is more difficult. And I actually wonder in humans whether our past, which has come from smaller groups, is one of the reasons we have all these kind of aberrations in the way we deal with the world. Here's an ant that lives in a smaller society, and it is not very capable of working together to carry back the food. In fact, these two are carrying back a caterpillar, and they've struggled against each other so much that they've wrung out all the juice from the caterpillar. It's turned into a little rag, and two flies are dive bombing the remaining juices to steal them. So by the time they get it home, there may be no nutrients left in there. Now, the ultimate teamwork and assembly line ants are the leafcutter ants. These have societies of millions, and they carry back leaves. And just to give you an idea of some of the parallels, this is an excellent example. We go down to Latin America, you'll see them. They can carry back, literally a single colony can carry back tons of leaves a year, but they do not eat leaves. They turn it into a mulch on which they grow a fungus, which is a fully domesticated fungus. It only lives with the ants. The ants control its genetics. They do vast monocultures of this stuff, just like modern human societies with our monocultures. And they do this with an assembly line that turns the leaf into food and for the fungus, and actually applies pesticides, weeds out all other fungus, everything you can think that human farmers do, the ants do with their fungus. The most primitive of these ants actually have much smaller gardens, and they have fungi that can escape to nature. And they're very much like the early human agriculturalists who would take things from nature, and those things were grown in small gardens, and they were genetically robust and didn't need to be tended very much. And they didn't suffer from diseases. These ants do the same thing. They take fungi from nature. They can those fungi can grow back to nature. They don't have to deal with all the problems of modern agriculture. It's only after we domesticated these crops that we ended up with all these difficulties of keeping out pests, diseases, potato blights, and so forth. And the ants now have to do the same thing. How am I? So the size of societies also affects the infrastructure that they use. So large ant societies actually have highways, and this is a view from the air of leafcutter ants' highways, which can be a foot wide. These are palm trees all through here. These are the nests, which can be 40, 60 feet across and go down 30 feet and have thousands of chambers intricately organized. And I'm going to end with a couple about warfare, because only ants and humans have warfare, and we've both done it as our societies have gotten larger. Smaller societies in ants have a kind of, in this case, the honeypot ant, a kind of ritualized battle. They don't go straight at the jugular. They check each other out, and they circle each other in this species to see who's biggest. So the ants watch each other, and the ones that are... This actually is demonstrating something called tactical deception that's only supposed to be in intelligent animals like primates and humans. It's actually standing on a pebble to look bigger than a bigger ant. It's cheating, in other words. And there are all kinds of rules in battlefields in terms of who gets killed. The smaller, cheaper labor, these little ants get chopped to pieces here by an enemy. This is a termite soldier that's actually, you can see parts of ants all over the place. The small, cheap labor moves forward fastest, gets killed, and the big ants, the soldiers, arrive only when it's safe. The colony has invested a lot in them and smashes and kills the enemy. In this case, that termite soldier. Anything you can think of, ants seem to have done first in terms of military strategies. And here is a ant that actually has it's a suicide bomber ant. It's from Borneo. It actually is the orange one here. It actually ruptures its body when it contacts the enemy and spews a toxic yellow glue everywhere, killing both of them in a tableau. And these warfare behaviors become more important as societies grow bigger and bigger. And the largest battlefields ever recorded are now in California, with groups of up to trillions of ants, colonies that cover hundreds of square miles, battling in fronts, particularly around San Diego, that go on for miles, with millions dying a day. These are invasive species that, for particular reasons, have lost the capacity to stop fighting, and they've developed super colonies that are basically taking over the world. They're making a bad name for other ants. Ants in general, actually, though, when you look inside the societies, we see all sorts of aggression all the time, but inside the societies, there's even a kind of devotion. They're very united in their developing the young. Here they are at the brood chambers and working together. And that's the other side of the flip side of the ant societies. There's aggression between groups and a total devotion within groups that's even more remarkable than humans. And this allows them to work together in very unusual ways. Here are ants actually connecting one tree to the next. They actually do this with their bodies. They actually link together so that the other ants in the colony can run over them, this living bridge, and collect food on the other side and come back with it. This has to be the worst job in the ant colony because you're stuck there looking at the rear end of another ant all day. And it also, this total devotion to the group also means that they have the total commitment to the society, including the capacity to kill themselves at the moment's notice for the common good, including, in this case, a whole bunch of ants deciding that they don't like me stepping on their colony, this is my foot here. This is how I usually look in the field. I believe you remember this. So that's a little mini view of ants. Thanks.
Something I learned from Mark Moffett: if you are in the field and decide to disrupt the home of millions of ants, it's a good thing to have duct tape with you, because Mark taught me to put duct tape around the top of my socks and my ankles, because that helps you, avoid getting bitten by ants a little bit. We still emerge bloody.
Yes, that simply means that you only start getting bitten by the time they swarm up your whole body to your neck instead of by the time they reach your feet. So it gives you about 3 more extra minutes of work.
And as a feminist, I would like to point out, I am pretty well versed in ants now, thanks to Mark. All the ants you just saw were lady ants, right, Mark?
Yes, ants are all female societies. They're in fact sisterhoods. Males really don't have much to say in ant civilizations. They exist for one purpose only. And that purpose requires that they stay alive for a day or two and then keel over and die. They seem to die happy with that one purpose, but they don't participate in social life.
We might pick that up a little bit more when we have our discussion. But right now, I would like to introduce you to Dan Ariely. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Predictably Irrational: The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions, and of The Upside of Irrationality: The Unexpected Benefits of Defying Logic at Work and at Home. Dan is the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University, where he holds appointments, I meant to ask you how to pronounce this, where you hold appointments at the, is it Fuqua? You don't want to mess up that word. The Fuqua School of Business, the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience, the School of Medicine, and the Department of Economics. You're ubiquitous. You're like the Ryan Seacrest of academia. He is also, I love this, Dan is also a founding member of the MIT Center for Advanced Hindsight, which is a real center, which is awesome. Dan, please.
So let me start by saying that I have one of Mark's picture hanging in our lab. It's a picture of the ant carrying the big leaves. You gave it to me a few years ago, and I use it for whenever students complain about how hard they're working. So I thought, we're in a church. I do lots of research on bugs in human thinking, but I thought an appropriate topic for this particular setting would be to talk about cheating, lying. So, if you open the newspaper, you realize this is all around us, and the question is, what do we know about cheating and lying? How does it work? And people often have the view that this is about some bad apples, right? That there are some individuals made of, you can think whoever you want, that kind of really plot to steal and cheat, and the rest of us are really just kind of wonderful. And the question is this really a good view of human nature? It's actually quite an important distinction, because if you say, if it's all about bad apples, then all we need to do is to have better HR processes so we don't hire bad apples. But if all of us have the capacity to cheat, then maybe we need to think differently about how we organize the workplace, government, and so on. So, to look at this, we start by a very simple experiment. Imagine you were part of my experiment. I would give you a sheet of paper with 20 simple math problems. And I would tell you that I would give you $1 per question you solve. I would pass this around, and I would say you have 5 minutes, solve as many questions as you can, $1 per question, go. You would work as hard as you can. At the end of the 5 minutes, I would say stop, shred the piece of paper, eliminate all evidence, and tell me how many questions you got correct. Now you have a chance to cheat. Right? Now what you don't know is when you shred the piece of paper in the shredder, it only shreds the sides. I know how much you really solved. So what happened? People solve 4 problems, but they report to be solving 6. And it's not as if there's a few bad apples. We find out that lots and lots of people are cheating just by a little bit. And it turns out that people not only cheat by a little bit, they also feel comfortable with themselves. Now, how does it work? The way we understand it is that people try to accomplish 2 goals. We try to view of ourselves as honest, wonderful, honorable people, and we also try to benefit from cheating. Now, you could say, how can you do both? You're either honest or you cheat. Well, it turns out that as long as we cheat just a little bit, we can do both. We can benefit from cheating just a little bit, and at the same time, we can keep viewing ourselves as honest, wonderful people. We call this the fudge factor. This idea that there's a range in which we could be dishonest and still think of ourselves as good people. How would you check something like this? What kind of test would you do? So the first thing we wanted to find out, how do we shrink the fudge factor and how do we expand the fudge factor? How do we get people to cheat less and how do we get people to cheat more? So the idea how to get people to cheat less came to us from a little joke. I'll give you the Jewish version of this joke. A guy goes to the rabbi and he said, Rabbi, you wouldn't believe what happened. Last week, I came to synagogue, I was sitting there, and when I left the synagogue, I realized that somebody stole my bike. The rabbi said, this is terrible. Somebody stealing your bike from synagogue? I'll tell you what you do. Next week when you come, sit in the front row. And as we go over the 10 commandments, look around, look back, look at the audience. And when we get to thou shalt not steal, see who can't look you in the eyes. And this is the person who probably stole your bike. The guy is very excited, the rabbi is very excited with the idea. He does this. The rabbi catches him after service and says, so, did it work? The guy said, Rabbi, you wouldn't believe it. It worked like a charm. The moment we got to thou shalt not commit adultery, I remembered where I left my bike. Now, where's the experiment in this? We went to UCLA and we asked 500 undergrads to try and recall the 10 commandments. None of them could remember all 10. Some of them invented interesting new ones. Which actually, it's an interesting question, right? When you ask people, what should there be in the 10 commandments? It's interesting what people invent. But anyway, what happened afterward? We just asked them to recall the 10 commandments. They failed, but still, then we tempted them to cheat. What happened? Nobody cheated. Now, it wasn't as if the people who remembered more commandments cheated less and the people who remembered few commandments cheated cheated more, nobody, after even trying to recall the 10 Commandments, cheats. In fact, even when we take self-declared atheists and ask them to swear in the Bible, and then we give them a chance to cheat, they don't cheat afterward. So it's not so much about God, it's about the fact that when we get people to think about their own morality, they seem to be cheating less. We also did this with the honor code. We asked students here at MIT to sign an honor code, say, I understand that this short server falls under the MIT honor code. Then they shredded it, no cheating whatsoever. And not cheating whatsoever despite the fact that MIT doesn't have an honor code. Right? The students were just signing something that had no meaning, but nevertheless, they didn't cheat. We actually ran the same experiment also at Princeton. Princeton has a very strong honor code. They take the freshmen and they kind of give them a week-long crash course on morality. Lectures, the a cappella group has some songs about morality, all kinds of things about this. We waited 2 weeks after they finished this crash course on morality, and we tempted them to steal money from us in the same way. What do you think happened? Did they steal less than the MIT students? Just the same. When we got them to sign the honor code, none of them cheat. When we didn't get them to sign the honor code, both of them cheat to the same degree. Now this is kind of good news, bad news, right? It says that the good news is that when you remind people about their own morality, they don't seem to cheat. The bad news is that 1 week-long crash course on morality doesn't seem to work very well. If you try to create a social change in terms of how honest or not honest people would be, it's unlikely to be a 1 week-long course that would be effective. We took this idea, by the way, to the IRS. So we said, look, here's what we find. We find that when people sign on the top, then they don't cheat so much. Think about all the forms of the IRS. You finish filling all the form and then you sign. You finish cheating by that time, right? It's over. You're not going to fill all the form and then at the end say, oh, I have to sign. Let me go back and revise what I've done already. So we said, why don't we move the signature to the top? And they said, well, it's illegal. You can't. People have to sign afterward. We said, what if people sign twice, before and after? They said, that's confusing. We said, what if the first item on the tax return was, would you give some money to a task force to fight corruption? I said, that would achieve 2 goals. First, if people sign it, not only have they signed something, they also have took an action. They've given money to a task force. That would create even an increased commitment to honesty. Plus, we said, if they don't want to give this $25, you can audit them. They don't want to talk to us anymore. But we did this experiment with an insurance company. This is an insurance company that sends people letters asking them to declare all kinds of information. What do we find when people sign on the top versus on the bottom? There's a big difference, about 15% difference in the extent at which people cheat. Exaggerate, let's call it. Okay, so this was all about getting people to cheat less. How do we remind people about their own morality and get them to cheat less? How do we get people to cheat more? Not as a life goal, but just to think about it a little bit. The idea here also came from a little joke, and the joke is that little Johnny comes back from school with a note from the teacher that says that little Johnny stole a pencil from the kid who was sitting next to him. And Johnny's father is furious. He said, Johnny, I can't believe you did this. You never, never, never steal a pencil from a kid who's sitting next to you. You're grounded for 3 weeks and just wait until your mother comes. I don't know what your punishment will be, but I'm embarrassed and humiliated. We never, never, never steal a pencil. Besides, Johnny, his father continued, besides, if you need a pencil, you could just say something. You could just ask. I can bring you a dozen of pencils from work. Now, why is this amusing? Because I think that we all kind of have the intuition that we would have a very hard time taking 10 cents from a petty cash box, but we could easily take a pencil from work. Now, why is that? I think it's to a large degree because the moment it's a pencil and not money, we can tell ourselves stories about it. We can say, oh, the workplace really wants us to take pencils, or everybody does. Or if I take a pencil and give it to my kid, they would leave me alone and I could do a few more emails which will benefit the work. I mean, there's lots of stories we can tell ourselves. In fact, in another set of experiments, we find that more creative people cheat more. Why? Because if you think about cheating as this ability to be dishonest but still convince ourselves that we're honest people. It's all about storytelling. It's all about being able to convince ourselves that we're still good people while we're not. And if you're more creative, you can just tell yourself better stories about it. You can justify more easily. It's all about being able to rationalize lots of activities. So how did you test this pencil versus pen versus cash idea? Imagine that you do the same task I described earlier. You have these sheets of paper, and in one case you give it to me, and I pay you. You say, Mr. Experiment, I solved X problems, give me X dollars. So you shred the piece of paper, you ask me, and I pay you. In a second condition, you come and you say, Mr. Experiment, I solved X problems, give me X tokens. I pay you not in money, but I pay you in tokens. And you take these tokens and you move 12 feet to the sides and change them to dollar. In a sense, what happened is you're cheating for token that then become money. You're cheating for something else, but it will not be that something else for long. It will very quickly turn out to be money. What happens? People double their cheating in our experiments. This, by the way, for me is the most worrisome experiment. Because if you think about how society is moving away from cash to all kinds of other representation of cash that are more abstract, stocks, options, mortgage-backed securities. Think about all of those things that people could do with those more abstract, removed modalities, mediums, that might help people be dishonest, but at the same time keep on believing that they are moral. The last experiment about getting people to be more dishonest, we asked the question of what happens if you see an example of somebody who cheats in an egregious way. So imagine you're sitting in a big room and all of a sudden there's somebody who cheats in an egregious way. I ask somebody to stand up after 30 seconds and say, I solved everything. What do I do now? So you're all here, you're all solving the first problem, and somebody's saying that they solved 20. You can't believe that they're right. And they stand up and you say, you solved everything, take your $20 and go away. What happens now? Turns out lots and lots of people cheat more. But it turns out that if that person doesn't represent somebody from the in-group, they look like somebody from an out-group, the behavior is different. So we ran this experiment at Carnegie Mellon. And in the first condition, the student who stood up had a Carnegie Mellon sweatshirt, and everybody was a Carnegie Mellon student. Now cheating went up. But in the other condition, the student was wearing University of Pittsburgh sweatshirt. Now when he stood up, he was not telling people, look, you can cheat here and get away with it. He said, but by this action, he basically said, there are people from these other universities who cheat. What happened now? Cheating didn't go up, it went down. So it means that when we see people from our in-group behaving immorally, our understanding of what's okay and what's not okay changes. But when we see people from another group cheating, all of a sudden it's like the Ten Commandment experiment. You say, oh, cheating is involved, I don't want to be involved in this, and people are less likely to do it. The final thought I want to share with you is a question about cultural differences. People always think that there's huge cultural differences in cheating. Let me just ask you, how many people here grew up in a different country? Raise your hand. Okay, from all of those people who grew up in a different country, how many of you think that in your home country people cheat more than the Americans? How many people here think that people who grew up in a different country, in your home country, people cheat less than Americans? The same? Okay. So, you know, most people when I ask this question think that in their hometown, in their home country, people will cheat more than Americans, with the exception of Canadians. So we tried this experiment in different countries. I grew up in Israel. I went to Israel. I tempted Israelis to cheat in the same way. They cheat just like the Americans. We went to Italy. Italians cheat just like the Americans. British cheat just like the Americans. The Chinese cheat just like the American in our task. Here's how we understand it right now. Culture, there are cultural differences, but what culture does is to take an activity and move it from the moral domain to a non-moral domain. Is cheating on your spouse, cheating or not cheating? Different cultures have different answers for this. Cheating on your taxes, cheating or not cheating? Different cultures have an answer for this. Is cheating an insurance company, cheating or not cheating? So what culture does is it basically take an activity from the moral domain to a non-moral domain and the other way around. But when we deal with something in the moral domain, like our task, it turns out the similarity between people is very high. We did find one cultural difference. We went to Washington, D.C., We went to bars where congressional staffers hang out in, and we tempted them to steal money from us in the same way. And then we went to bars in New York where bankers hang out in, and we tempted the bankers to steal money from us in the same way. Now, who do you think cheated more? The bankers or the politicians? Who votes for bankers? Who votes for politicians? Okay, I also thought that it would be the politicians, but actually it was the bankers 2-1. But I should say that these were congressional staffers, so these were kind of junior politicians. Maybe there's room for improvement. Thank you.
I feel compelled to confess that this pen is from my bank. But I do not feel like I'm cheating because everybody else does it. And I'm, spreading the word about TD Bank. I do have a price tag connected to the back of my dress as well. Just kidding. Did you find any differences at all? I mentioned gender with our aunt friends. Any differences between men and women cheating?
So, it's interesting. It's always women who ask these questions.
Let me rephrase your question for her.
We actually don't find in any of our tasks, we always measure it, we haven't found gender difference yet.
That's interesting.
Okay. Now, again, the way to think about it could be, our task is kind of abstract. Right? It could be that when you make the task much more embedded in the culture, you would find a difference. But this abstract task in which you basically steal money from a university, there's no difference. I do want to say one more thing. We tested about 20,000 people. We found about 10 bad apples, people who cheated a lot. We found about 14,000 people who cheated a little bit. And if you think about how much money we lost on the bad apples, it's about $150. If you think about how much money we lost on the good apples, which is just a little bit, it's about $25,000. Just for the range of activity in terms of what's blue-collar crime when people plan and execute cheating versus kind of little cheating in the margin but done by many, many people.
I have to ask, what was the most interesting 10 commandment that somebody suggested?
Oh, that somebody suggested. I need to think about it. I haven't looked at the list for a while. If
it comes
remember,
to
I'll come
let
back
me know. The sort of putative theme of this event is that, of your book, is that it's not putative. People are irrational. Dan's books are, I feel like I'm on the Home Shopping Network or something. Both of their books are amazing. Dan's books were so fascinating, and he gives very specific, amazing anecdotes about how irrational people are, and of course by the title, predictably so, and it's really interesting to find out how you can harness your own irrationality for beneficial reasons. But ants, is it fair to say that ants are rational, Mark?
Well, it's hard to say. The confounding factor is that ants are stupid. So, and that doesn't mean that they don't have things like personality and differences. But in fact, we, in a sense, in myrmecology, are probably stuck back in the pre-Dan days of looking at ants and not really assessing individual choices in the sense that he is. But nevertheless, ants probably in general function better as a group. And I think that's because they have a total nationality. They have a total devotion to the in-group, the colony, and the way that humans don't. They assess each other as colony members or not colony members, and that's what really matters to an ant. They cannot leave the group. They cannot defect to Canada. They can't do things like that.
And they assess each other how?
Through chemical cues, just like the chemistry on the cells of your body cause an immune response if there's a mistake or if that part of the body is treated as a parasite. Ants absolutely form a group that's called a superorganism. And because of that, there's a unity of purpose. They don't have to deal with the fact that someone's wearing a University of Pennsylvania t-shirt or whatever you were saying within the colony. There are some conflicts sometimes in colonies, but we don't know if they're rational or irrational. That's a trickier question.
So would it be fair maybe to say that ants run completely on instinct, which is analogous to rationality in humans?
Well, no, actually, no. Ants, do have a lot of individual differences. There are actually, for example, despite the common belief, the busy as a bee, there are ants that are inherently lazy. They do very little all the time. And there are other ants called elitists, which is probably not a very good word for them. It's more like drudges who do most of the work. They're like, in your family, there's probably someone who does the dishes every day, even though they don't want to. And there are ants that have a motivation to get things done, and they try to press other ants to do the job. So there are differences among ants in which we could look for, things like irrationality, I suppose.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So if you think about kind of Adam Smith economics, view of economics, it's basically that if you have lots of actors and everybody is perfectly selfish, the invisible hand will kind of fix things out. And if you think about the stock market, you say the stock market is driven, the optimality of the stock market is driven by lots of people competing with each other, not cooperating, but this high level of cooperation is actually created by lots and lots of people, each competing, each trying to be selfishly maximizing them. It looks to me like for ants it might be the opposite, that the size of the colony and the success of the whole is not based on competition, but actually on pure cooperation. Is that?
It could be, particularly in the larger colonies, where you have more of this mass action, and this cooperation is manifested in all kinds of ways. I mean, there's not a lot of individuality in terms of need in ant colonies. For example, one of the cool things is that ants regurgitate food like birds do to each other, and as a result, over time, what's in your stomach, there's not one ant out there that's getting all the caviar, another ant that's having to survive on crude potato mash. All the ants in the colony end up with the same contents in their stomach, so there's an actual uniformity of what they all have and therefore what they all want and what the colony as a whole needs. And this certainly drives the colony to work in maybe a more functional manner.
There's a parallel I'd like to draw, if I'm right on my reading of both of your respective works, between something that you talk about, Dan, that humans do called herding or self-herding, and the way that would be herding, not cutting yourself, and Mark about the way that ants know how to follow each other's trails with pheromones. So Dan, will you talk about self-herding?
Sure. So self-herding is the idea that when we act a certain way, we often don't remember why we acted in a certain way. You buy coffee somewhere, you take a particular action, you spend a lot of money on wine. You don't remember exactly why you did that, were you in a good mood, in a particularly bad mood, but you remember you did it. And once you remember you did it, when you come next to a situation, you say to yourself, what did I do before? And you say, oh, I remember what I did. I bought this wine, I bought this coffee. It must have been a fantastic decision. I always make wonderful decisions, so this has to be one of those, so let me do it again. So what happened is that you could get people to make one decision that deviates from their regular behavior, and once you get them to do it once, they think it's a representation of themselves, and they keep on doing it over and over and over. It's basically the idea that our memory is better than our preferences. We remember what we've done, and we tend to follow it over and over and over, sometimes getting into a trap of long stream of bad behaviors.
Can you draw a and also you talk, that's self-herding, but it's also herding, like if we're walking down the street and we see a long line of people,
Oh yeah.
It's human nature to sort of get in that, what's going on? I want to get in that line, right?
Imagine there was a fire here, and you saw everybody running in one way. Would you stop yourself and say, hey, let me see all my options and evaluate them? No, you would have a tendency to run following everybody, and actually there's a lot of really sad examples of this. When there are buildings on fire, it's often the case that there are exits with nobody and exits that were too many people. We just have this tendency to just run after other people, whether it makes sense or not.
Do you see any parallels with the way that ants seemingly spontaneously follow the same trail? They're one after another?
Yeah, well, ants can choose between paths that make more or less sense, and over time they tend to do that. But of course, the fire situation probably arises in ants pretty often where they make the wrong choices, and there's a mass response, usually set down by chemical cues that say go this way, and those build up, and all the ants follow a certain decision. The thing about ants is that they're acting through a kind of ignorance that in a sense is something you're talking about, because we don't know our own motivations. We can rationalize, ants presumably can't, but no ant following these trails knows where it's going, why it's going there, and throughout ant lives, there's a total ignorance of the individual. They can work out certain details, and I think they do have a little mind in there that probably understands certain things about the world, but in terms of the whole colony, it's entirely an emergent process. Everybody makes local decisions, and through a mass action, where the ants that go in a certain direction say succeed better, survive better, get there faster, find the best food, and build up the most responses, the ant as a colony as a whole moves in the right direction. But they also have the chaos of the moment, which is what you're talking about. There are periods of transition where decisions can be wrong at this mass level.
I want to open it up to a few questions from the audience. Before I do that, quickly, if it's possible, what has surprised you the most about studying ants?
Well, what surprised me the most is these parallels with humans, which suggest that there are organizational principles about living in large groups that don't have much to do necessarily with our intelligence. The fact is that a tiny group of hunter-gatherer humans doesn't need a highway, but as bigger and bigger groups come about, all these things emerge that we think of as human, and that we can study in ants in terms of their principles, and in fact, perhaps those can apply to humans, because humans came from hunter-gatherer groups. We're in a very awkward social situation here where we're living in millions when we haven't before. And that's kind of the curiosity. We're learning how to do this for the first time.
And Dan, I feel like as a reader, every page of your book surprised me. What surprises you the most?
So one of the problems that concerns me the most is what's called self-control problems. You know, there's lots of stuff that is fun right now, but not so good in the future. Think dieting, right? Not so much fun, good for the future. Exercising, not so much fun, good for the future. Medical compliance. Lots of problems are like this, and it turns out we fail in those problems repeatedly. Every time that it's now versus later, we don't seem to be good at the later. And I've done lots of research on this. The thing that surprised me the most is a result that came out 2 weeks ago. Let me ask you, how many people here have ever texted while driving? How many people are lying right now? Texting while driving is one of those examples, right? When you look at it, you say, how stupid could we get? You know, we risk our lives, dramatically increasing the chance of dying because of momentary excitement with a vibrating phone that we just want to answer. Here's the thing. Some states, including here, have passed a law where texting and driving is illegal. What do you think happened in those states? Accident rates because of texting and driving have gone up. Why? Because before the law was passed, people were texting while driving. After the laws were passed, people still text while driving, but they do it under the wheel. No limit to human stupidity, I think.
So that's most surprising. There's no limit to our stupidity. Please, anyone has a question? There's a mic right there. Please, sir, do you want to hop up and hit the mic, please? Thank you.
Two questions related to ants. Number one is that
Speak a bit louder or closer.
Okay, sorry. The two questions about ants is that in the case of human society, it seems to be the technology that drives the expansion of the kind of complexity of society and large how many the population is one civilization can hold. In the case of ants, you talked about the some ants like hunter-gatherer versus there's a metropolis of ants, and what causes those differences? And also, my understanding that those worker ants share the same genetics, and if that helps out the more harmonized way of the life that they seem to lead.
Okay.
Can you repeat the question? I'm not sure I understood the question.
Don't know if I got it all. I heard the part about the role of the shared genetics, and I think I'll address that. Certainly, the fact that ant colonies tend to be tightly genetic groups, in fact families, certainly helps out, but we're finding more and more that there are ant societies, including these huge ones in California, that are held together beyond rational bounds. There are trillions of individuals that couldn't possibly meet each other, that are hundreds of feet apart and still are unified. So really it's a kind of this nationality. It's the in-group versus the out-group. And in human societies, there are in and out groups even within a nation, which makes things much more complex.
By the way, in human beings, making an in-group is really easy. If I took you and I called the people on the right blue and the people on the left red, and I gave you the right t-shirts, in 2 minutes, the people in blue would think that you're morally superior to the people in red and the other way. around, it turns out it's, it's really easy. It works for every color. It turns out it's really easy to do. And for ant, of course, it's really important.
Do you have a question, sir? Come on up.
Hi, thank you very much, guys. That's wonderful to hear. As an undergraduate, I was studying ants for a little bit, leafcutter ants, and so it's fun to see this and to hear what you guys were saying about how paths will sometimes form randomly from really random movement. It was striking for me to watch ants moving in seemingly completely random directions, and then suddenly there's a trail that starts forming, and off they go. And I was wondering if maybe part of the parallel here between human nature and ant nature is maybe our brains working in a similar way, this idea that sort of the circuits in our brains appear as pathways from a seemingly random set of neuronal firings. I was just wondering if that sort of piece of psychology ever acted as a bridge between your fields.
So the question is, do our brains work in the same...
So I think there's a very basic work of how neurons work, which is if two neurons, the path between them gets activated, gets stronger and stronger and stronger. I think we're correct in that regard. But I think actually, so our big difference from ants is the neocortex, is the new part of the cortex. Like if you think about the emotional part of the brain, the basic instinctual part of the brain, and then you think about all the facts that get us to think deeply about stuff. That's a big difference. What's interesting actually is that this part that is kind of, our progression over the rest of the animal kingdom actually gets us into trouble often. First of all, because often we make decisions based on our gut intuition, based on the emotional part of the brain, and then we use the neocortex just explain why we did that. We do something and then we tell ourselves stories about why we did this. It also leads us to all kinds of other things that ant will not do. So if you said who is more rational, ants or humans, there's lots of stuff that our neocortex and our ability to think and so on and plan for the future actually gets us to make mistakes. They are much more instinctual, and the instinct have just been reacting to cost and benefit in the environment and being honed in a much better way.
Do you want to add anything, Mark?
Oh, just like a good example of parallels that might be in common are when we turn maybe much of our brain off, and that's, for example, when we're walking around on sidewalks and masses and busy streets, and all these patterns emerge of how pedestrians flow past each other. Ants show some of the same patterns. There's a case where these higher brain functions don't seem to play a role, and yet as a whole, in both cases, the flow patterns are very efficient. We seem to move through narrow spots in a highway or a trail in the same way and so forth. So they work without requiring too much of our brain.
I just read about a study where Southwest Airlines wanted to find out if they should change their seating policy, and they hired someone to do an algorithm based on ant behavior to see what the best way to get a lot of bodies in a small, dispersed in a small space was. I still hate boarding Southwest Airlines. Any other questions? Do you have one? Great.
Hi. So it sounds like the ants are mainly concerned with the social good and not so much about their individual benefit. So I'm curious how that plays out with the cheating and talking about trying to control cheating, because with the 10 Commandments, it sounded like you're sort of referencing the social good, but at the same time, people didn't sort of optimize their own ability to cheat in general more than a certain thing. So what are the limits to sort of how people perceive cheating in terms of, not cheating because of the social good versus, because of they might get caught, and how do you use that? Is it better to try to say you shouldn't cheat because it will hurt society, or because you'll get in trouble?
Yeah. So, hi, David. So the way we think about it is that people are not rational when they cheat. I mean, I described to you a very gloomy picture about people cheating, but the fact is people cheat much less than they would if you were just perfectly selfish, right? If you're walking around here and you knew that you would never be caught and there was a wallet somewhere, the rational thing to do is to take it and go home. There's a good chance you wouldn't do it. So people cheat, but they cheat less than they would if they were perfectly rational. People give to charity more than they would if they were perfectly rational. By the way, when we go around university and we ask people to give to charity, which students do you think give the least? People who left which class? Economics, right? I mean, we just taught them to be selfish, and that's the right thing to do, and that's what they do. So what happened with cheating is that it's about socialization. It's about learning about how to play with others. It's learning about social utility. The name for caring about others in economics, it's social utility. We do care about others in a way that is not described in the rational system, and that's what gets us to care, and that's what gets us not to cheat. We incorporate the well-being, the well-being of others. Not perfectly. We're not willing to often die in the same way, and we're just about social utility. We have a component of selfishness, a component of social utility. Can I say one last thing?
Sure.
We're getting close to the election season, so I want to tell you something about politics. We, together with Mike Norton, we just did a study. We asked people, Americans, there was this philosopher called John Rawls. And John Rawls said that a just society is a society that if you knew everything about it, you would be willing to enter it in a random place. I mean, if you're rich, it's no wonder you want a wealth distribution that is very skewed. If you're poor, of course, you don't want it. Rawls said, what if you don't know where you're going to enter into society? What kind of wealth distribution do you want to have? How much of the wealth do you want to be owned by the rich and how much do you want by the poor? What's called the Gini coefficient. So we asked about 6,000 people, how do you want wealth distribution if you didn't know where you were going to enter society? So imagine you have a distribution of wealth like in Sweden, a distribution of wealth like in the US, and you say if you didn't know where you would end up, which one would you like? 92% of Americans prefer Sweden. But what's more interesting is that when we break it by Republicans and Democrats, for Democrats it's 93%, for Republicans it's 90.5%. So what it tells me is that I think when you dig deep down and you ask where we are in terms of human values, Republicans and Democrats are actually quite similar. It's when you obscure deep human values and you start calling different names and you have politics and you have different terminology for different things, then we start believing that we're actually more different than each other. And I'm hoping that, political season will become more about our deep beliefs and just kind of superficial labeling.
Something very optimistic about that. Mark, we haven't heard from you for a while, so just final word. I'm sure everyone wants to know this. What does the head of an ant taste like?
It's a little nutty, and
No, you are.
I think that's a good final word.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Dan Ariely and Mark Moffett. Their books are available for sale by Brookline Booksmith, which is just outside in the Google Pavilion. And Dan has pre-signed some books. Mark will be signing them in real time. I love the link you made between creativity and cheating. It makes me think that a lot of the authors here at the book festival are cheaters. You can tell everyone you're at the Boston Cheating Festival today.
It's called fiction.
Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.
Buy the books.